BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hi, this is the Farming Today podcast. I'm Stefan Messenger. And today, a new approach to a rural crime.
Instead of people going to court after a livestock attack, is giving them the ability to go on an awareness course for responsible dog ownership. We've trialled it in Wales, and from September we're going to go UK-wide with it.
But first, should British farms and supermarkets have to pay the travel and visa costs of seasonal staff? The idea has been suggested as a way of protecting workers travelling to the UK to pick fruit and vegetables, some of whom are taking out loans to get here, leaving them vulnerable to exploitation. The Employer Pays Principal feasibility study, jointly commissioned by the government and the Seasonal Worker Task Force, looked into the idea, which has support from some retailers and recruitment agencies. But the National Farmers Union says the findings raise concerns about the challenges growers would face if forced to cover these additional costs, from job cuts to reduced production. Martin Emmett is chair of the union's Horticulture and Potatoes Board.
It is a very detailed report, and it highlights some approaches whereby the concept of employer pays principle could be fulfilled, most of which would actually cause a lot of the cost to fall on the primary producer, with essentially the assumption that they might be able to absorb it. We need to be very clear that the primary producer in a lot of supply chains would be in no position to absorb that. And indeed, the report indicates that actually going through with some of their options would take a lot of businesses out.
Why can't growers pass on the costs ultimately, to the consumer?
It's in the hands of the retailers what they pay for the product, and then in turn what they actually pass on to the consumer. Basically, it's the net return to the grower from the retailer, which is the critical factor here. And would it accommodate these very significant additional costs, which we know could be as high as £1,500 per person?
This, ultimately, though, is about tackling exploitation and abuse of seasonal workers. There will be people, Martin, asking, well, why should these workers have to pay for their job and in many instances rack up debts as a result of paying travel costs and visa fees and so on?
Well, essentially, it is the choice of the employee whether they want to come to work in this country. And they will choose to do that in most cases because they will end up very much better off compared to working in their home country. We do want to give them that choice. If we have prohibitive costs associated with the scheme simply won't be viable, and the employees themselves wouldn't have that option. And we know most of them want to take this option because they come back year after year.
What happens next then, Martin, with all this information? Because we should say that the government is on record as having said it has no plans to impose EPP, Employer Pays Principle, for seasonal workers.
Yes, well, we welcome the government taking that position. It's very much in the retailers' hands now how they want to respond to it.
Martin Emmett there from the NFU, and in response the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs repeated that it had no plans to impose the employer pays principle for seasonal workers. To suggest otherwise, the statement says, is completely false. Next, all this week we're taking a deep dive into the UK's shellfish industry. And did you know that almost 90% of the mussels produced in Scotland are grown in Shetland? Mussel farmer Michael Tate produces 1,000 tonnes a year on long ropes. His company, Shetland Mussels Limited, employs 17 people to help build the lines, set the moorings and place the young mussels, known as spat, on the lines to grow. They have 24 sites dotted around the islands, and our reporter in Shetland, John Johnston, has been to meet him.
So we're on the shore of Vale Sound, which is an inlet on the west side of Shetland. This is where we sort of started our business way back in '97, and we've got several mussel sites in this voe, as we call it, or bay.
Let's step down here and look at one of the ropes that you're growing the mussels on.
Here's a sample of the type of shells that we're trying to market. So they're about 55 millimetres, these ones in this particular sample that we've pulled up here. We'll have started the work on this 2.5, 3 years ago. These are kind of nice example. They're quite clean shells. They're pretty much ready to go into a supermarket somewhere near you. To farm mussels nowadays, you need the right equipment to get it done efficiently, and we're standing next to one of our boats right now. This is the Skeld Lass. It's about 15 metre by 6 metre steel workboat with 2 engines. It's got cranes. It's got these davits which we use to lift the lines up. We have a machine at the front for putting the mussels back in, and we use this boat to do a whole heap of tasks. This is our tractor equivalent.
Is there any special techniques that you use to grow such big mussels?
The mussels here are rope grown, so we have them suspended from floating structures. There's lines in the sea, and if anybody was looking at it from the land, it would look like a field marked out on the water. And down from those lines, we have ropes hanging, and that means that the mussels are no lying on the seabed. They're no in amongst the mud, so they're grit free, and they're not in the intertidal zone, so they're not only getting the chance to eat. Sometimes they're able to eat anytime they want, 24 hours a day, for the whole time they're in the sea. One 200 metre long line could have well over 50 tonnes of mussels on it in just one line.
What is your main market?
We've specialised over the last sort of decade and more in servicing the UK market, so both wholesale and the retail. So we're a member of a cooperative. It's called Scottish Shellfish Marketing Group. It's basically a bunch of us mussel farmers working together to share a resource of a factory in Glasgow to put mussels into the various types of packaging you'd see in retailers.
So it's mostly going to the south of England, not into Europe.
We're increasing the volume that we're selling to Europe. We are a growing industry. This year we've been at our sort of maximum tonnage that we've seen so far, at over 11,000 tonnes for the whole of the Scottish sector. The mussels that go into Europe need to be A grade. For us in Shetland, that's been no really a big issue because our waters are predominantly A grade all year round. There's not many people here. We don't have any sort of big issues with sewage, pollution or water runoff. And so therefore we can do all the paperwork required. There is veterinary certificates and lots of things you have to do, but we have been able to sell to Europe all the way through the last few years.
It's an incredible amount of mussels that you're producing here, and 600,000 metres of rope that you're growing them on.
Yeah, the scale is grown over the years. It's a lot of lines and it's a lot of work. It's not just a simple case of dangling in a rope and then 3 years later the mussels pop out. We have special areas where we know we can collect spat. We have to move the spat to growing sites. We have to control the density that we're growing them on the lines. But the end result is that we're producing mussels year round.
And what's your favourite recipe with mussels?
Well, I'm cooking them myself. Moule marnière is a great one. You just can't really beat it. It's just like it's great theatre cooking them at home. You got that big pot coming off the stove. You lift the lid, and it's got a really good wow factor. And I probably do personally lose some of the health benefit because it's hard not to cook up some frites and have a nice baguette with them as well. But it's all good fun.
Wow, sounds great. John Johnston with that report. A new ban on the use of lead in ammunition has been announced by the UK government in a bid to stop the toxic metal contaminating fields and waterways. Shot containing more than 1% lead and bullets with a lead content of more than 3% are to be prohibited. It's a long-awaited move that ministers say will protect iconic wildlife and improve water quality. The BBC's Rural Affairs correspondent Jenny Kumar told me more.
Well, the focus of this is to protect wildlife and the environment. DEFRA says the ban will prevent the release of an estimated 7,000 tonnes of lead, which is a toxic metal, into fields, forests and wetlands each year. They say it will also save 100,000 wildfowl, including ducks, swans and waders, from dying from lead poisoning annually because the birds often confused scattered shot for grit and end up eating it. Now, the government aims to legislate by next summer, and there will be a 3-year transition period to help shooting and hunting sectors to shift to more environmentally friendly alternatives. There'll also be a 2-year period for outdoor shooting ranges where lead is used to implement measures that prevent pollution from entering the environment.
And this has been mooted for some time, hasn't it? What's been the reaction from, I suppose, both the shooting industry and wildlife groups?
Well, the wildlife groups are generally happy. They see it as a win for people and the environment. So, for example, the Charity for Wetlands and Wildlife say that an end to this toxic lead scandal is finally in sight. They would, however, like things to move quicker. They want to see legislation implemented as soon as possible and for the government to ensure that it's complied with. The RSPB also welcome the ban but say it's long overdue. They're also disappointed that the ban stopped short of a full ban. And in terms of the shooting industry, now, they've known this was coming and they've been preparing for it for the past 5 years. So in 2020, they brought in a voluntary 5-year transition away from lead shot for shooting. So this ban hasn't come as a surprise, and the industry has welcomed exemption for things like air guns and shooting on ranges, all of which they say they've lobbied for.
But there are still some concerns.
Yeah, one of the main concerns is around the transition time. So, for example, the Countryside Alliance and shooting groups would like it to be phased in, this ban to be phased in over 5 years rather than 3. They say there needs to be more time to enable more alternative ammunition to come on stream. The government says alternatives have become more efficient and widely available in recent years, with steel and tungsten-based shot becoming 2 popular options.
Jenny Kumar there. A new 3-year strategy for tackling rural crime across Wales will offer greater protection for people and wildlife in the countryside, according to the Welsh Government. Among the priority areas are tackling dog attacks on livestock, as well as damage to ancient monuments, known as heritage crime. Rob Taylor set up the UK's first dedicated rural crime team within a police force in North Wales, and in 2021 was appointed Wales's Rural and Wildlife Crime Coordinator. He told me more about what had been achieved since then.
We split our strategy into 6 areas, and so you look at habitats alone, we've had community payback within the national parks, which is a huge thing that's happened the first time in the UK, where offenders, instead of going to prison, they get community service, and we utilise that work within the national parks, clearing of pathways, litter picking, and making the environment a better place. We're also doing a lot of work with regards to livestock attacks by dogs. It's a huge issue throughout the UK. It affects our farming community in a massive way. So we've got a law going through Parliament, which we've been working on about 12 years. We've just passed the House of Commons on Friday, and it now goes to the House of Lords, so it's making significant progress. But the other big thing as well with that is that we've introduced a scheme in Wales at the moment, and the best way to liken it is to a driver awareness scheme. I can hear people booing already, but what this is about is, instead of people going to court after a livestock attack, is giving them the ability to go on an awareness course for responsible dog ownership. So it's a first. We've trialled it in Wales, and from September we're going to go UK-wide with it. So the feedback we've had from that has been overwhelmingly positive as well. There's a lot of good stuff going on out there.
And yet, as recent figures highlight the ongoing challenges, don't they? So NFU Mutual reporting that rural crime claims in Wales increased from £2.4 million in 2023 to £2.8 million in 2024.
Yeah, I think you need to put this in perspective, really, because it is claims. Unfortunately, the NFU Mutual don't provide us with the detailed breakdown of where those are and what they include. But when you look at 2.8 million and you compare it to England at 37 million, and the UK over 50 million, it puts in perspective, Wales alone is only 6% of the claims for the whole of the UK. There's another figure out there as well, is that livestock attacks in Wales have dropped by 64%, from 800,000 to 300,000. So there's significant drops the other way as well. So we have to put it in perspective.
And in terms of the updates that you're making to this new strategy, there's a focus on heritage crime, the abuse of ancient monuments and so on. How big an issue is that?
We found it's been a big issue over the years. You know, we've had people damaging Offa's Dyke Wall, for example, graffiti on churches or castles, people night hawking, which is using metal detectors on protected sites. And, you know, we want to protect it for future generations. You
set up the first dedicated rural crime team within a police force in the UK.
That's right.
Are rural crime teams considered a bit of a nice to have rather than being central to the strategy of police forces up and down the country?
It's sad when I see a police force that doesn't have one, but it's a choice depending on the layout of that police force, if they're more urban than rural. But I think they're essential because if you're a farmer and you report a livestock attack or a livestock theft or something that's pertinent to your farm, and you have, and I'll say a lay police officer comes, that's a police officer that has no experience whatsoever in farming, doesn't have the empathic view, doesn't understand the impact it can have on the farmer. So having a rural crime officer, to me, makes it more slick, professional, empathic, and gives the service that the farming community deserves.
Rob Taylor, Wales's Rural and Wildlife Crime Coordinator. And that's all we've got time for. I'm Stefan Messenger, the producer is Rebecca Rooney, and Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.